The red and blue lights were bouncing off the windows of my cabin, like some kind of twisted fireworks show, and I remember standing on that old porch with my arms folded, just trying to keep my breath steady, while the sheriff's deputies walked up the gravel drive. And behind them, sure enough, there was Denise, the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, smirking like she'd finally won the war. She pointed at me like I was a wanted criminal and shouted, "That's him, the trespasser, refusing to leave the property." She thought this was her final act, her victory lap in front of the whole neighborhood. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out something that stopped every voice cold, because it wasn't a driver's license, wasn't even a deed to the cabin. It was a piece of paper that proved my family still owned the entire county. The deputy's hand trembled as his flashlight caught the seal, and Denise's smirk cracked like glass. That night changed everything, but to understand how we got there, I need to back up. This cabin wasn't some random getaway. My father built it with his own hands 50 years ago, tucked between the pines, with a creek out back, where the trout practically begged to be caught. Summers meant fishing, winters meant splitting logs, and for a long time nobody bothered me here. Neighbors waved, sometimes brought over pies, and life moved at that slow, steady pace that makes you think maybe people are still good. Then Denise moved in. She arrived with her husband, Frank. Poor guy looked like he hadn't had a full night's sleep in decades, and within 2 weeks she had muscled her way into HOA leadership like she was running for president. Suddenly, there were rules about mailbox colors, fines for grass growing more than 2 inches, threats if you left Christmas lights up past January 2nd. Most folks grumbled but followed along. Me, I didn't. My cabin sat outside their development. My land wasn't part of their charter. At least that's what I thought. One sunny afternoon, she came strutting up my drive with a clipboard under her arm. "You need to remove that shed," she barked. I told her politely the cabin wasn't part of her HOA. She blinked at me like I'd just spoken Greek. "Every property here is under our jurisdiction," she snapped. I pointed at the wooden sign nailed to a tree Warren County line. My father had put it there decades earlier. She glared at it, muttered, "We'll see about that," and stormed off. That was the beginning of the war. At first, it was petty anonymous letters in my mailbox, fake invoices demanding HOA fees, neighbors repeating rules they thought applied to me. Then it escalated. Denise cornered me at the general store one Saturday, waving papers in my face, shouting about unpaid fines, loud enough for the whole parking lot to turn and stare. "You'll lose your cabin if you don't pay," she screamed. I just shook my head. Some people need control the way others need oxygen. The night it crossed the line was when I came home from fishing and found 3 HOA board members standing in my driveway, with clipboards snapping pictures of my cabin like they were about to list it on the market. I told them to leave. They refused. One said the HOA had voted to reclaim my property for unpaid dues. I laughed in his face. You can't reclaim what you don't own. The next morning, I found a note shoved under my door. "Vacate within 24 hours or the HOA will call the authorities." And that's exactly what Denise did. She dialed 911 and made it sound like I was a criminal squatting on her land. Neighbors showed up like it was free theater kids peeking from behind their parents, all of them waiting to watch me get dragged off. Instead, I handed over that document. Sheriff Collins raised his eyebrows, cleared his throat, and for the first time in his career, I think he was speechless. Because the truth was simple, my family never sold this land. The Millers had leased pieces of it for schools, roads, even whole neighborhoods, but ownership always stayed with us. That paper wasn't just proof of my cabin, it was proof of the whole county. But Denise didn't stop there. She called an emergency HOA meeting the very next day. I walked into that clubhouse late on purpose, wearing an old flannel and jeans, while the room buzzed with gossip. She glared at me from the front table. "You have some nerve showing up here," she hissed. The county surveyor, Ellen, stood up with a folder and started to explain the land records. But Denise slammed the microphone and pulled the fire alarm like a madwoman. The bell shrieked, people panicked, folding chairs scraped across the tile. In the chaos, she shouted that my cabin had been condemned in an emergency vote and ordered her board members to start abatement procedures. It was theater, but it scared people. I raised my hands and tried to calm the room. "Folks, there's no fire and there's no emergency on my land." A few nodded, but others just stared at her, waiting for orders. That's how deep her grip was. When Ellen finally got the microphone back, she declared for the record that my family's ownership predated the HOA by more than a century. Denise's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She whispered to her cronies, "Operation Clean Sweep now." I didn't know what that meant yet. I would soon. 2 days later, I drove up to find contractors chaining off my driveway, an excavator rumbling on a trailer, and Denise herself standing in a yellow hard hat, like a queen commanding soldiers. "We're here to help," she said sweetly, waving a clipboard. "By tearing down my home?" I asked. She rattled off a list of bogus violations: unsafe porch steps, old chimney, non-compliant mailbox, and announced the HOA had condemned the structure. I told her quietly, "That vote means nothing on my land." She ignored me, ordered the men to chain the drive, and told Wes, the contractor, to start demolishing the porch. I walked to the chain, laid my hand on the cold metal, and said, "Stop. This is a mistake." For a moment, even the crew hesitated. That's when Sheriff Collins's SUV skidded into the clearing lights, blazing, gravel spraying. He leapt out, hat nearly flying off. "Shut it down right now," he barked. The operator froze the bucket, hovering just above the wood my father had built. Denise crossed her arms, calm as ice. "We voted. We're enforcing safety codes." Collins turned on her, his voice sharp enough to cut. "On land you don't own. You touch one more board and it's criminal damage." The machine shut down. The neighbors gasped, and for the first time Denise looked rattled, but she wasn't done. That very night, she rolled up with a couple developers in shiny black SUVs, waving contracts and promising me 7 figures if I'd sell. They stood in my driveway with their slick suits and briefcases, whispering about luxury resorts, condos, shopping plazas. Denise chimed in, "Take the money, leave the headaches, let professionals handle this land properly." I shook my head. Rich isn't the same as right. They pressed harder, smirking. One even said, "Your father isn't here now, is he?" That lit a fire in me. I stepped down from the porch into the moonlight so they could see my face. "You think cash erases a century of work? You think it buys my father's sweat, my grandfather's name, my family's promise to this land? No. Take your papers and get out." They hesitated, then Denise snapped her fingers and stormed off, promising, "This isn't over." And I knew she meant it. Sure enough, she dragged the whole fight into court. She marched up the courthouse steps with 3 lawyers like she was storming the Capitol. The place was packed with neighbors, reporters, even the sheriff standing in the back. Her lawyers called my cabin a hazard, called me hostile, waved complaints about property values. When it was my turn, I laid 2 thick folders on the judge's desk, original land grants, tax records, lease agreements. One clause in particular, if the HOA violated terms through harassment or damage, the landowner could revoke the lease with 30 days' notice. The gallery erupted in whispers. The judge raised his eyebrows and said flatly, "Mr. Miller holds the rights. Any further trespass will be met with full penalties." Denise's face drained of color. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Timing is everything, and her own husband Frank stood up and told the court, "This isn't about safety. It's about control." You could have heard a pin drop after that. That night, the neighborhood shifted. People started fixing park benches, planting flowers, and laughing again. Kids rode bikes, neighbors strung up lights, and suddenly life didn't feel like a rule book anymore. But Denise couldn't accept it. She tried one last, desperate stunt, called in bulldozers to flatten the clubhouse, the playground, even the roads, screaming that if she couldn't have control, nobody would. We rushed to stop her. Contractors looked uneasy, neighbors gathered with phones out, and she actually climbed the steps of a bulldozer herself. I grabbed the railing beneath her and said, "Look around, Denise. You're burning down everything you built." For what pride? For a long, painful second, she just stood there breathing hard. Then she dropped the clipboard and walked away. Sheriff Collins put a hand on my shoulder and muttered, "This stopped being about the HOA a long time ago." The HOA dissolved without ceremony 30 days later. No speeches, no parades, just papers signed at the county office and neighbors quietly tearing down the old signs. In their place came potlucks, lemonade stands, even an ice cream shack run by kids with a coffee can for donations. The county eventually declared the ridge a permanent nature preserve, locking it away from developers forever. And me, I sat on my rebuilt porch one evening, coffee in hand, listening to the crickets, the laughter, the kind of peace that feels earned. Frank stopped by and said softly, "She's getting help. She asked if people hate her. I told him they don't. They're just glad it's over." And I meant it. Because this was never about hating her. It was about protecting what mattered. Now here's the thing. Storms, like Denise, don't disappear. They just change shape. She came back once, quieter, humbled, whispering an apology she could barely get out. I told her, "Start there, one day at a time. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't." But I learned something. Watching her unravel. Power built on fear always collapses. Real power is patience, kindness, and knowing when to stand firm. That's how you outlast people who scream the loudest. So let me ask you this: if you were in my shoes, faced with someone who tried to take everything, who called the cops, the lawyers, the bulldozers, would you forgive them when they finally broke? Or would you press charges, make them pay for every board and nail they tried to destroy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I want to hear it. Was I too soft, or was patience the real victory? And hey, if you've ever had your own run-in with an HOA or a neighbor like Denise, share it. Let's see how many storms we've all weathered.